known then as Gaul, destroys the Celtic domination of the region, kills millions of people. It's been called a genocide before. Does it for his own personal gain, for money, for political power in Rome, for the rich class in Rome. And Julius Caesar is often credited for bringing modern-day France into the Latin and Mediterranean cultural sphere, hooking them up to the, grid of that era, so to speak, bringing culture and literacy and all these things to that area. If you went to a modern Frenchman today and said, was it worth it that the Romans killed all those Gallic peoples but brought you into the cultural sphere of, Roman life? And I imagine many Frenchmen today would go, well, yes, it's certainly worth it to us in the long term to have that happen. Of course, the person you're interviewing on the street didn't know any of the people on the Celtic side who had to die to make that possible. How many Celtic deaths is the introduction to Mediterranean culture worth? How many Iranian deaths is the spread of Hellenism worth? Well, if you don't know them, and it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years ago, the number of deaths really don't matter anymore. We're still benefiting from the fact that Hellenism spread, and we didn't know any of those people who had to die. If you take away or exclude these byproducts of these historical conquerors' careers, things like the spread of Hellenism for Alexander, these conquerors end up looking a lot more like people who came on the scene and inflicted a horrific amount of killing and suffering on others for no good reason. Unless, of course, you consider conquest a good reason all by itself. If the conqueror in question happened to be an ancestor of yours, you might indeed, consider it a good thing. It's interesting how countries will associate their own greatness with the largest spread of their territory, geographically speaking, or the greatest domination over other peoples. You look at a map, and the high watermark of nations is when they encompass the most territories and have the most people under their control and, win the most victories in battle. Whatever it is, we still think of national greatness the way they thought of it in earlier times. We just aren't as enamored with the overt use of the powers it sometimes takes to achieve that. Historians are just as susceptible, by the way, to looking at the bright side of conquest. They will almost argue for the need sometimes for these people to appear on the scene. These people, in the minds of some historians over the ages, have been agents of change. There's a term used in economics that I think applies here: creative destruction. The best way I could think of to describe creative destruction's concept is when you think of an old forest, one that's rotting and bug-infested and choking the light from the ground, and nothing can grow, and it's just stagnant and dying and not going anywhere. It's a waste. And then a fire comes and burns it all down. The ashes regenerate the soil. The clearing allows the sun to reach the ground. The space that's been created allows new seedlings to pop up, and you create the conditions for new growth and regeneration. The way historians have written history casts certain individuals in that role of historical arsonist for a good cause. The world is stagnant. All these cultures are literally in rotting houses that just can't seem to fall from their own weight, and then Alexander the Great comes in with gasoline, lights the whole region on fire, and, creates the conditions for the next world to sprout up. Julius Caesar does the same thing. All of a sudden, these people who never had any intention of starting a new world, so it would be better for all of us, get credit for that. And as generations pass and we forget the names of all the people that died to make that possible, all of a sudden these people who don't deserve maybe a good label attached to them when you look at their motivations for what they did, begin...
The capacitor is empty. 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 Warp drive active. The capacitor is empty.